Good morning, everyone. This symposium marks the 10th anniversary of Trinity Center for Urban and Global Studies. First of all, we would like to thank all the people and organizations who have supported us, worked and partnered with us, and contributed to our growth. They include the Board of Trustees, former President Jimmy Jones, President Joanne Berger-Sweeney, former Deans of Faculty, Rena Frieden and Tom Missel, Dean Tim Cresswell, and numerous Trinity students, faculty, and staff, as well as many people and groups from the Hartford community and overseas. This symposium is very timely, although its planning was not intended to be. I want to acknowledge Sarah Bronan here for helping us identify the overall theme a few months ago. As we've been putting the symposium together, the physical crisis facing Hartford has been building and is reaching a critical pressure point. When translated into Chinese, the word crisis literally means crisis plus opportunity. We hope this symposium allows us to seize this combined crisis opportunity to re-examine the critical issues regarding Hartford, including its historical and cultural assets and its various regional connections. In an important way, the symposium also picks up from our earlier research on Hartford that led to the publication of the book Confronting Urban Legacy, Rediscovering Hartford and New England's Forgotten Cities. It is encouraging to see the book has been used in the classroom at Trinity and other universities in the Hartford region and beyond. We hope the taped symposium today will be of teaching value as well. The symposium consists of two panels with a title of Historical and Comparative Lessons, Regional Thinking and Local Action. They feature the presentation by a variety of locally engaged scholars and knowledgeable practitioners in the Hartford community. The two panels will be followed by a speech by Mayor Luke Bronan during the common hour. Lunch will be served then. I think and hope we don't need lunch to incentivize many students to come and hear the mayor. I want to thank all the panelists and the moderators for participating in this important symposium. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our president. Joanne Berger-Sweeney, the 22nd president of Trinity College, is a distinguished neuroscientist, professor, administrator, and champion for innovation entrepreneurship. Before beginning her term at Trinity in 2014, she served as the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Tufts University. Prior to Tufts, she was a faculty member and associate dean at Wellesley College. Berger-Sweeney earned her undergraduate degree in psychobiology from Wellesley College and her MPH in environmental health sciences from the University of California, Berkeley. She completed her postdoctoral training at National Institute of Health in Paris, not the one in Bethesda, Maryland. While working on her PhD in neurotoxicology from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, she did the proof of concept work on Razanine, which went on to be the second most used Alzheimer's drug in the world. Berger-Sweeney serves on several Hartford area boards, including Metro Hartford Alliance, which is represented on one of our two panels, the second panel, Hartford Healthcare, the Kinetic Conference, Independent Colleges, the Hartford Consortium of Higher Education, and the Capital Region Development Authority. She recently co-chaired a working group of presidents from 38 Connecticut colleges and universities, the Higher Education Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative, which developed a master plan to foster innovation, entrepreneurship at the in-state public and independent institutions of higher learning. Additionally, Trinity College is a key partner in the Hartford East Hartford Innovation Places planning team that has been selected to receive a share of $30 million in state funding to spark economic development and investment innovation. Let's welcome President Berger-Sweeney to give the welcome.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming here to Trinity College for this very special day. the 10th anniversary of our Center for Urban and Global Studies. Wow, that's really something, and that's really, I think, quite remarkable for a liberal arts college. You might expect that a university would have a center like this, particularly if they're located in Hartford, but the fact that as a small liberal arts undergraduate institution, we have made this a signature program, I think is really quite distinctive. A couple of things I want to share with you. I have this whole list of notes that people gave me. Sean Ming, you gave the whole talk, so don't need to say too much about that, but I'll tell you a couple of things. One, that when I was hired as president of the college, and this is now my 4th year, the idea was to have a stronger and better connection with Hartford, the urban global city that Hartford is. That really underscored my hiring. I was asked from the very beginning what I thought about Hartford and being involved in the city. So it really is an idea and a concept that is rooted in academics, which is why it's a center and why you publish books and write articles, but also that bridge between the academic, the theoretical, and the practical, what we are actually doing to help the city. So when I had an opportunity to hire a new chief academic officer, Tim Cresswell, I happened to choose a geographer who specifically wanted to come to Hartford and study Hartford and be a part of Hartford as a place. So you will be able to find throughout our academic programs a real connection to cities, small cities, global cities, and you will find also the practical, which we do out in the city. I'm particularly proud of that as a background. The other thing I want to tell you is that last week I was in Rome because Trinity College has a campus in Rome, one of our oldest global programs, 47 years old. And that was long before international education was a fad. We did a rededication of the center because we have a new director who has started after, I think the previous director was there between 20 and 25 years. And the lecture that I attended as part of the Rome campus rededication was Rome, an urban global city. And why I want to share that with you is this theme of urban global extends much beyond just the center or some of the formal relationships you think we might have. It really is infused throughout the campus and throughout our academic programs. The third thing that I want to mention to you is that I think Hartford has unique opportunities. There are 11 institutions of higher education in the Hartford region. And I think not a single one of our institutions alone can serve that core function of providing educational opportunities for the city of Hartford, but combined, I think we have the possibility to do something phenomenal. So I feel as though I am here on, not the ground floor, because so much was done before I arrived, but I think we are at that inflection point where if we start to work together as an educational community, we can really provide that support, energy that is necessary for Hartford's revitalization. So with that, I thank Sean Ming Chen and all of the people that helped organize this conference. But the conference is a small part of the everyday work that you do to make Hartford better, to make Trinity College better, and to really make us an urban global leader. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes? Yes. Okay, fantastic. All right, so good morning, everybody.
Hey,
good morning.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I know we're all distinguished and accomplished, but it's okay to get loose and be excited about cities, right? We're here for a reason. It's okay to engage and be enlivened this morning, so welcome. My name is DeVarian Baldwin, and I'm professor of American Studies here at Trinity College, and I will be moderating, chairing the first panel, which is entitled Historical and Comparative Lessons for this very auspicious occasion to celebrate the 10th anniversary of CUGS. And just to kind of second what President Sweeney said, it's really, we are in the urban century, the point within the world where there are more people who are in urban environments than are in rural environments for the first time in the recorded history of the world. And so it's really vital that we are here to engage and to examine these urban issues, both in historical and contemporary fashion. So with that in mind, it is my duty and honor to introduce the panelists before you for this first discussion. And I'm going to offer each one's bio first as a group, and then they will, if they agree, present in the order in which it was read, in which they were read. And then we will, for approximately 10 to 12 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, okay? And then we will have about 10 minutes left for question and answers before we move on to the next panel. So again, welcome. Our first panelist is William Hoseley. Mr. Hoseley is the principal of Terra Firma Northeast. He's a cultural resource, development, and marketing consultant, historian, preservationist, writer, and photographer. He was formerly director of the New Haven Museum and Hartford-based Connecticut Landmarks, where he cared for a chain of house museums, including Hartford's Butler McCook and Isham Terry houses. Prior to that, as a curator and exhibition developer at Wadsworth Atheneum, his Sam and Elizabeth, Legend and Legacy of Colts Empire in 1996, spawned the Coltsville National Park. Next, we will have Mr. Thomas Rice. Mr. Rice is a 2017 graduate of Trinity College and currently teaches fourth graders how to sail at the Public Sailing Center, Sail Newport. He was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, and gained familiarity with Hartford while at Trinity. His interest in comparing the two cities goes back to his participation in the Cities Gateway program. He wrote his senior thesis in urban studies comparing the two cities. He continues to follow the current developments in both places and would like to see them both thrive. And last but not least, Sarah Bronin is on faculty at the University of Connecticut School of Law. Professor Bronin holds the Thomas F. Galvin Chair in Real Property Law and is faculty director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Law, and is also an architect and practicing attorney. Professor Bronin has written books and articles on historic preservation, land use, and renewable energy. Among other volunteer pursuits, Professor Bronin chairs the City of Hartford Planning and Zoning Commission and its Climate Stewardship Council. Let's welcome our panelists. And please, Mr. Hoseley.
Jamin, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I am honored to bring a local history perspective to today's forum and to address one of the most fundamental challenges of our time: how to rekindle the prosperity and civic spirit that made Hartford one of the richest small cities in America, a city aspirational enough to, among other things, build this lovely college. Hartford was an economic leviathan with a national reputation for industrial technology, agriculture, social reform, religion, finance, education, and of course, insurance. The power of local history is the promise of civic attachment, the quality of local consciousness and pride of place that may actually be necessary to achieving an ethical, socially cooperative, productive engagement with something bigger than oneself. An article by columnist Neil Pierce talked about soft factors like civic attachment as the root of economic development and a strong civic culture. People that care about a place, Pierce observed, spend more time and money there and are more productive and entrepreneurial. Civic attachment fosters happiness and trust, which foster teamwork, loyalty, and perseverance. What part of economic development and prosperity doesn't depend on that? So what we can do here and now to make a healthier, happier, and more enticing and sustainable Hartford region. It starts by doing more in the classroom and in our daily lives to instill a sense of place, past, and community in one another. Place-based education is a pedagogical movement modeled here at Trinity during the 1990s and early O's with Susan Pennybaker's Hartford Studies Project. The champion of this agenda in Hartford today is Professor Jeffrey Partridge and his Hartford Heritage Project at Capital Community College. In the 1990s, the Dobell administration made headlines when the Brookings Institute published his Awakening the Sleeping Giant essay, and the next year when he argued that cities like Hartford were a hidden asset for schools like Trinity. He spoke of a new academic vision for the college built around our belief that the heart of our academic strategy is our relationship to Hartford. We are proud of our connections to build to a great and historic city, he continued, and so are moving aggressively to build academic linkages to our own city and cities around the world. Sounds right to me. It's potentially a great niche. Trinity competes with schools like Amherst, Williams, Hamilton, and Middlebury. What do we have here that they don't have? An urban context and environment with a deep reservoir of talent in culture and the arts, government, insurance, medicine, and industrial technology. Also a history so multidimensional that it alone could be a platform for an undergraduate education. As place pedagogy theorist David Sobel puts it, using place as an integrating context situates students in the community, researching aspects of its history and learning about local lore, researching aspects of its local watershed, conducting community health surveys, and developing exhibits for a local museum. Sobel speaks of how a pedagogy of place recontextualizes education locally, making it a preparation for citizenship, a concept worth underscoring. And he concludes that place as an integrating context improves student achievement, critical thinking, enthusiasm, and engagement in learning. The writings of Wendell Berry have long inspired me. No one speaks to the power of place with greater clarity and expression. Berry observes that if the word community is to mean or amount to anything, it must refer to a place. He further asserts that the vitality of a local economy is strikingly related to the vitality of local community, and that when a community loses its memory, its members no longer know one another, no longer trust one another, and can hardly avoid harming one another. The late Ralph Elliott, a Hartford attorney and the chair of the U.S. Constitution's Bicentennial Committee, wrote an article for the New York Times titled, "It's Time to Teach Connecticut History Again." There he described Connecticut as a readily comprehensible microcosm of the United States, an ideal platform to teach how the nation was formed, grew, suffered, and prospered. How much more vividly the lessons of our country's past would come alive, he continued, if they could be related to people and places within easy access of our students. Douglas Putnam's famous Bowling Alone, the Collapse and Revival of American Community seems more prophetic now than it did 17 years ago. He talked about how public trust in government has declined, how Americans have dropped out of political involvement in droves, how all forms of family togetherness are less common, that long-term trends in philanthropy are down, and about reciprocity, the sense that I'll do this for you now without expecting anything immediately in return, confident that down the road you or someone else will return the favor. He talks about how place-based communities have been supplanted by interest-based communities and how Gen Xers and millennials are less likely to trust people outside their generational cohort than in past generations. He documented a decline in civic commitment on the part of business leaders and noted that citizens in states characterized by low levels of social capital are readier for a fight. Sound familiar? It's kind of grim. Among many recommendations, Putnam advocated for improving civics education, not just how a bill becomes a law, but how to participate effectively in the public life of our communities. The good news is that the necessary revolution is already quietly underway in the rising tide of what I call the locophilia movement. Eat local, shop local, invest local, and by all means, teach and learn local. The point is, we here in Hartford are sitting on a gold mine, not just in the astonishing $billion-plus invested in cultural assets, but in all forms of distinctiveness in localisms that are inherent to a place that has been evolving for almost 400 years. If I lived 10 lifetimes, I could never get to the bottom of all the teachable content underfoot here. This may be overkill, and we surely need to delve deeper into the diverse cultural groups who have contributed along Hartford's journey. But consider this. On November 10th and 11th, the Wadsworth Athenaeum is hosting a 2-day symposium featuring 15 lectures by scholars from as far away as London, all about Hartford born, raised, and buried J.P. Morgan. It's not just famous people like the Colts and Frederick Law Olmsted and Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's the layers and layers of interwoven texts and subtexts, triumphs and tragedies, so much, so close, a cornucopia of teachable experiences. It is possible, Wendell Berry writes, to live in and study the same place decade after decade and find it ceaselessly exceeds comprehension. This has been my experience exactly, and it is my hope for our future that we can do more to make sense of place by capitalizing on the gifts we have. We need a magnet school with a place-based curriculum. We need to insert local learning into the classroom beginning in the 4th grade, doubling back in the 8th, and culminating in senior projects for the highly motivated. Preservation values should overarch city planning. We need to ramp up interdistrict programs where city and suburban students team up to drill down into the mountain of content here. And finally, we need to start talking about how to kickstart visitation and tourism, an economic sector with huge untapped potential. This will sustain the treasures we love and remind visitors and residents that thanks to our culture and heritage, this place is already major league, already something to know, love, and cherish. And oh, there we go. That was the city's program, Trinity, freshman group. I always love going on tour with the students, and there we were at the Jack Doherty. I thought he was still living. Wait. What's going on there? No. Anyway, there we were in Old North Cemetery in the north end of Hartford, an extraordinary place that I won't embarrass. Well, let me ask, how many people have ever set foot in Old North Cemetery? That's good. It's really, really great. And this is the thing I do. It's a Facebook site, Historic Hartford, and it's just endlessly joyful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Tom Rice. I graduated last year, and this is some of the research I did comparing Hartford to my hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. And I think that there are going to be some interesting insights to draw from this comparison. So first of all, why did I do this? There are a number of reasons. The first is that they're really similar in size, and Dean Chen will tell us about why these smaller cities are understudied. And Bill was talking about how they can have tons of resources even though they're small, but they need to be further delved into. There are also capital cities here in southern New England, so they have these long, similar histories. And with that, we're able to look at how they've continued and gone up and down over a period of 400 years that Bill was talking about. Specifically with my two cities here, there's going to be a divergence in 1980, and that is the heart of what I researched. So my research questions were, what key factors have contributed to relative success in Providence since 1980? What has gone wrong in Hartford? And can Providence help us to better understand Hartford? And so with that, I have 3 sub-questions. I looked into how different ways that we can measure the success of the two cities, specifically what Trinity's role is here as compared to Brown University's role in Providence as kind of the two leading undergrad educational institutions historically in the two cities, and what might be some of the policy implications. So first off, I have a little chart here of the per capita income in 2015. The darker areas are the higher per capita income in US dollars. You can see the little scale at the bottom. So if we look at Hartford and Providence, they're both cities with poor areas in the center, and they have more wealthy areas in the outlying suburbs. But the difference that I'm going to get into is that there are areas of the actual city of Providence, specifically if you look at the east side of the city before you get to the river, where there are higher income generating properties, and there are more tax revenues because of that. I think Professor Bronin will talk about in Hartford. And so it's kind of an interesting comparison. So moving on, just like to review some of the facts. I'm sure a lot of people are very familiar, but they're both founded the same year by kind of a visionary figure who left Massachusetts in each case. And they both had these manufacturing histories. They're both about the same size. The metro GDP, gross domestic product of the larger areas, are comparable, although we do see that Hartford's is larger. In Providence, there's been a strong mayor system. In Hartford, it's historically been a weak mayor, although now it's more of a strong mayor system. And then the populations of the metro areas are somewhat similar, but Providence is a good bit larger. And then I've put here the branding from the two city websites, which I think is another interesting connection. They're both using orange now. So next, I have a really, really important chart that shows our population in the two cities for each decimal census starting in 1790. And what we see is that they have really parallel curves, but around 1980, the population in Providence begins to increase again, and the population in Hartford continues the 20th century decline into the 21st century, although there is a slight uptick in recent years. But there is kind of a divergence there, and that's the focus of my research. So moving on from there, some other just charts of some census data. Here, income per capita citywide in 2000 and 2010. Hartford is always in red, Providence in blue. So we see that both cities had an increase in per capita income, but Providence's was significantly higher, and the gap between the per capita income in the two cities has increased between 2000 and 2010. Next, percent of families below the poverty level in the two cities. So in Providence, this number has decreased between 2000 and 2010, whereas in Hartford, you can see that it is level, if not increased, between those 2 years. And finally, percent of housing that is owner-occupied. So this is an important measure to look at the health of the city, and we see small increases in both categories, a slightly larger increase in Providence. But overall, the trend I'd like to show here is that there's a lot more owner-occupied housing in Providence right now than in Hartford. So overall, with this broad citywide comparison, the main takeaways are that Hartford usually is lagging behind Providence in some of these metrics. Providence has been improving in recent years, and in Hartford, it's been somewhat of a stagnation. Although the Hartford MSA, the metropolitan area, does have this higher average income than the Providence MSA, along with a higher GDP. So that's interesting, and that gets to some of our main issues with Hartford, that there are suburbs and a central city, and what many describe as a donut, where the suburbs are have more income and the central city does not. So moving on from there, just quickly, I'll go through the Providence, kind of a timeline of some of the events in Providence's development, the recent development that has led to the success. So in 1959, we have the College Hill Plan, which was an urban idea in Providence to save old houses right around Brown University. There was another plan called Downtown Providence, 1970, that wanted to obliterate a lot of that housing, but that plan did not go through. Then there was a Capital Center plan in 79, so this is right at the beginning of Providence's reemergence, and that was a really good plan that has been followed through to this day. There was a waterfront study, because Providence has a waterfront, like Hartford. A down city plan that focused on the area downtown in 92. Things were continuing to be redeveloped and saved. Then came along Waterfire, which many of you might have heard of. It's our big public art installation in Providence that is open on Saturdays throughout the summer, where they light fires along the river and everybody goes and walks and listens to music. Could be an idea for Hartford. They opened the mall in 99, Downtown Mall, which brings in lots and lots of shoppers and keeps people in the city. And in 2007, they changed the highway layout and built a new highway called the I-Way, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then there have been several new developments in recent years, and there's a new Hilton Hotel going up right now in Providence, so the development continues. So just to quickly look here, if people aren't familiar with Providence, you can see in the right-hand side the leafy area, the green area, that's College Hill and the east side of the city. Downtown, the CBD is labeled. The old highway cut through the central business district and what's called the jewelry district, and that was rebuilt to the south along the river where it says I-Way, and it connects with Interstate 95, the big thoroughfare. And so that has allowed for like 22 acres of redevelopable land downtown, and that is another economic boost. And then you see the mall up in the upper left-hand corner, which also brings in a lot of economic activity. And then just more closely, you see what they did was uncover this river that goes up to the mall where they have the Waterfire event, and they have a place called Water Place Park and a river walk. And many of the buildings that you see along the Water Place Park there are all like mid-2000s new construction, condos, and some office space as well. So then to move on to Hartford, what we see when we look at the development, there was a planning commission in 1907, Constitution Plaza in 1964. They built the highway 59 to 69. Then they started to have problems in the 70s. We have riverfront recapture, which I think we can draw some parallels to Providence. Population loss in the 90s, Hartford Whalers loss in 97. They built this convention center in 2005, and this I-Quilt plan is being coming to fruition now. And now there's also the discussion phase of the redoing I-84. And mainly what I kind of wrote about in my senior thesis here was that there's a parallel in the development, and even in recent years, between the two cities. But there are many ways in which Hartford has been just a little bit behind Providence with how they've gone about things. But hopefully Hartford can continue to work on things and do some of the things that Providence has done. So then, specifically, I have one other component to my research, and that is the colleges and universities in the cities. So here you have kind of laid out for you our institutions in each city. And again, there are many, many similarities because there are, traditional undergraduate institutions in both, graduate institutions in both, state colleges, community colleges, and so they both have a rich educational environment that I would say is pretty comparable now, especially now that UConn is coming to Hartford this year. But specifically with Brown and Trinity, I found some interesting differences. in the layouts. So if we look at Brown, it was founded in 1764, the first college in the state. It is very tied with the history of Rhode Island and with Providence. It's right downtown. They have expanded their campus across the east side of Providence in the College Hill neighborhood, and they have been in discussions about payment in lieu of taxes with the city, and they have done a good amount of that. And they've also built a medical school downtown, and they continue to invest in the redevelopment downtown. They also have partnerships with the Rhode Island School of Design on the east side. So they're very well integrated into the fabric of the city, and they are very multifaceted. They operate in many different spheres. And then I have a nice picture here of kind of the campus leading into downtown Providence. And what you take away from this is that the campus is right next to the central business district and the things that are happening downtown. So there's an easy flow between the two. And next, for a look at Trinity, we were founded in 1823. We weren't kind of the first school in the state. That honor went to Yale. And so we were kind of fighting at first to be accepted. Trinity was Episcopalian in a congregational state, and it had that battle to fight at first, and then of course moved to a new campus in 1872. So it is no longer downtown, not right next to the center of the city. So what I find is that there's arguably less of a direct connection to the city and a smaller scale of involvement in city governance and leadership through Trinity than there is in Brown. Although there are ways that Trinity does get involved in its own neighborhood, like the Southside Neighborhood Institutions Alliance. It's a different role than what Brown plays in Providence. And it's nicely shown by this photo, which you can see. We see this, it's a pretty look, but we're not quite as close to downtown as Brown is. So we don't have the advantages of being right there. So then just a couple of charts on Trinity and Brown. You see, if you look at the census tracts surrounding the two campuses, the data here show that they were, for per capita income, they were very even up until this divergence in the 80s, when the area surrounding Brown experienced a boom, and the area surrounding Trinity has not. And then as far as owner-occupied housing in the area surrounding the two schools, we see another real divergence where there are many more houses that are owner-occupied. So just summarizing, there have been a lot of differences. Things have kind of gone up in Providence, but home ownership, especially in the Trinity area, 4.88% of people here right around Trinity are owner-occupants, and that can hinder some things. And so on the bright side, how can Hartford follow Providence? I've summarized some points here. Through good civic leadership, public participation, the preservation ethos, preserving things, using our institutions, universities and colleges to better the city, and coherent planning, which I know Professor Bronin will be speaking about next. And yeah, that's that.
So thank you, Tom, for that very interesting presentation and for queuing up what I was going to talk about so nicely. So I'm really here, I think, to start the question of, Bill addressed Hartford's past. Tom addressed Hartford's past a little bit as well, and also its sort of current state. And I guess I'm batting cleanup here, to use a poor baseball analogy, go Astros, to look at Hartford's future. And so, as Tom mentioned, I've been dealing with planning efforts for the city as the chair of the Planning Commission for the last few years. And one of the things that has really come to light in my involvement with the Planning Commission has been how interested people in the city are in creating a more sustainable, walkable, livable city with a higher quality of life for everybody. But I'm focusing today on the environmental sustainability component because I think that that's something that is underplayed in how we talk about Hartford and how we talk about a future for Hartford. But it's actually something that's felt very deeply by residents who live here, that they want a more sustainable city. So if you look at, these are just some images from neighborhood planning here in Hartford. One of the points I wanted to make today was that planning is actually quite strong in Hartford. Each of our neighborhoods, which populate the city, here's some city maps, have done a strategic plan for their neighborhood. And these plans really have a lot of things in common. Preservation, something Tom and Bill both mentioned, interest in preserving neighborhood character more specifically, creating walkable communities, creating communities which have commercial areas that are coherent and are nice to walk in and are close to residential neighborhoods, access to opportunity, access to transportation, and so on. The maps of the city, so planning is important in Hartford. These are before and after maps of the city that are before a recent zoning code change in January 2016 and after. So in January 2016, in part as a result of these neighborhood planning documents, and I should recognize that Commissioner Melvin Colon joined this effort as a planning and zoning commissioner in trying to figure out what the best next steps were for Hartford's future. Zoning, of course, guides future development in the city. And so in January 2016, we threw out the old code completely and we developed a new code. One of the things that this map shows, since the riverfront has been, I don't think you can see this little pointer, but one of the things that the map shows is that the pink on the left, anybody know what that is in terms of zoning and land use? It's industrial development, the worst development possible, of course, in our infinite wisdom. Back when we were making these planning decisions, we said industrial development should be on our beautiful Connecticut River. One of the things that we've done in the new code is significantly decrease the amount of industrial development and all along the river change that to a zone called the Connecticut River Overlay, which is a non-industrial multi-use mixed zone. So getting back to the point that planning is important in Hartford, here's a cover of our zoning regulations, again showing a friendly person walking down the street, people eating outside, dense development, historic buildings, all the things that people said they wanted to see. We had an extensive process of community engagement over the course of 2 or 3 years. And these are the elements in the new zoning code that people might be surprised to know are in the new zoning code. Stormwater impact fees, reduced parking requirements, urban agriculture, composting facilities, probably one of the first requirements for electric vehicle charging stations in new parking lots, a Vision Zero and Complete Streets approach, new transit-oriented development zones, renewable energy allowed in every zoning district, native plants, and so on. So you see, even in 2016, as a result of these the feelings and impressions that we got from not only the neighborhood planning, but also the extensive public input we got, we really integrated environment into the zoning code. So from that process, we've had a lot of great successes. So there, actually that's my students, and I should say that the students at UConn Law School, where I teach, and other UConn departments actually came in to help us, did a lot of work with the zoning code, and so those are some of the students that worked on some zoning, but also the climate action plan I'll talk about next. We have a community garden that in the bottom left, that's Keeney Park, at Keeney Park through the Keeney Park Sustainability Project. The I-Quilt plan that Tom mentioned is pictured on the top right, the realization of a Tiger grant that was given to the city of Hartford. And at the bottom right is a microgrid, which is a freestanding fuel cell that powers in times of grid outage the Parkville Community School, the Senior Center, Health Center, as well as the library. And a gas station and grocery store, by the way, across the street, one of the first public-private microgrids in the country. From the zoning effort, we started on the process of creating a climate action plan, and for that too, I'd like to acknowledge Jack Hale in the audience, who as a member of the Tree Commission, joined members of 4 other city commissions, as well as Hartford 2000, and Hyacinth Yenny is here as a member of Hartford 2000, and a number of stakeholder organizations and Eversource, the utility, the water utility, others, to embark on a more specific planning process for climate action. And so for those of you who don't know, Hartford has adopted, as of last month, officially a climate action plan. Again, we had an extensive process of community engagement. The bottom right is Mayor Bronin holding a town hall attended by about 150 people on this specific topic in July. The areas that we tackle in the climate action plan are very similar to what we tackled in the zoning code: energy, food, green space, transportation, waste, and water. And I know you can't see what's written underneath each of these, but these are the vision statements in each of these areas that then are translated into 5 goals for each of the areas and a variety of strategies to achieve these goals. People would be surprised, if you haven't followed Hartford's progress in this area, that we have a number of initiatives that have already been done that address these that address each of these 6 action areas. So you see the top left, beekeeping workshop at Knox; top right, Blue Earth compost; bottom right, a bike valet at Nightfall, which hopefully you have all had the pleasure of attending; and then bottom left, Trash and Fashion, which is a recycling awareness fashion show that takes place here in Washington, D.C. and New York City. We've used the environment and used different organizations to support microeconomies. So here you have a farmer named Salvador who started off as a small plot farmer in a community garden, but now sells his wares at a local farmer's market. You have a riverfront recapture rowing team, and I didn't even coordinate with the riverfront comments, but it's embedded in what we do. A Transport Hartford photo of biking, and I know Scott Gall is here from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. They support a lot of biking initiatives here in the city. And then bottom right is some students at AI Prince Tech who, among other things, have developed a solar house right there on that campus. So I guess my themes today were really: planning is important for Hartford. There's been a lot of community engagement in the particular issues of sustainability and having a sustainable city from the planning perspective, but also from the implementation perspective. So we have, from that implementation perspective, we have a number of initiatives. They're documented, a lot of them online at hartford.gov/climate. Here's another great collaboration between the Hartford Garden Club and Friends of Keeney Park and the City of Hartford Department of Public Works, which has been very active, along with many other city departments, in achieving these goals. So I should mention, too, that as part of this climate effort, the Hartford Foundation helped to support a bigger grant that allowed us to have a sustainability office in Hartford full-time. So I don't think that that Mayor Bronin will focus on this in his talk. He actually we both just came from this bankruptcy forum this morning that speaks to some of the city's bigger challenges. But I guess I'm here to say that amidst these bigger challenges and amidst some maybe poor decisions that were made in the past, there is a major effort to reposition Hartford as a sustainable city. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to offer like a minute comment, which is also a question. And while I'm doing that, please think about what questions you want to ask of our wonderful panelists as part of the end of this discussion. We have about 15, 20 minutes for discussion, which is quite a bit more than we normally expected. So in my observation, as Professor Bronin just pointed out, the looming specter over a lot of this discussion is that we are in crisis as a city. Having a discussion about bankruptcy is real. It doesn't define or totally dictate all that is Hartford, but it's something that, in certain ways, many of the comments and observations people were making, there is an underlying kind of question about how do we spur growth? How do we rebound? How do we rebuild? How do we instigate, ignite, revitalize? And so I think it's just important to put that out there on the table. In a certain kind of fashion as well, when we think about the history of Trinity, the investment in Hartford is relatively new. I've talked to alum and faculty, et cetera, who for quite some time until recently were very reluctant to invest in Hartford. Did not want to see the kind of branding of Trinity as being situated in a small capital city. And so these things are real, and I think that it's important that in order to have these conversations, we must put these things on the table. For example, a significant amount of our faculty members live in West Hartford. They don't live in Hartford, right? I'm not trying to put a damper on the conversation, but these are structural realities that must shape how we just have these discussions. And so, but the problem sometimes I see with the conversation is that when we discuss moments of crisis, we talk about cities like Hartford, we discuss them in isolation. We discuss them as if their condition is a product of kind of a segmented, cellular, individualized phenomena without talking about, you know, the structure of region. The fact of the matter is that the poverty of Hartford is intimately linked to the prosperity of the other and the surrounding inner ring suburbs. That a significant amount of capital is allowed to, or individuals are allowed to come into the city, benefit from capital, reap capital, and carry it away from the city. Without residency requirements for our civil servants, et cetera, or the strong enforcement of those requirements. This is a real struggle. I'm not blaming anybody for living in West Hartford, don't get me wrong, okay? But what I'm saying is that the flows of people and capital in a regional context have to be put in the conversation when discussing the condition of Hartford as a capital city, this question of city and suburbs. And the reason why I'm saying this is because then when we develop an economic plan or a vision of revitalization, the almost primary focus is on trying to bring growth back into the city, trying to instigate and catalyze growth in the city, whether it be things we talked about, universities, place-based development, whether it be owner occupancy, questions of walkability. The underlying question for me in all these wonderful kind of framings is that how can we have equitable sustainability or equitable infrastructure and also have equitable prosperity? What happens many times we talk about now diversity in cities is talking about bringing elite or high income individuals back in this. That's called diversity now, right? In poor cities. And so that's something we have to address. That what does it mean when we're talking about revitalizing cities, and it means simply or in a major sense bringing wealth and bringing the wealthy, that's by tax base, bringing the wealthy back into the city. What will that mean for current residents who have maintained the city, who have made the city even a place to come back into? How can we think about sustainability from the perspective of those who currently live here, those who have maintained, who have created a space for Hartford so that people can come back and revitalize, regrow, sustain? And so I'm just wondering, thinking about these three wonderful discussions and observations, how can questions of place-based, owner-occupied, walkability, cultural tourism, universities as an anchor or a growth machine, how can these strategies be put into place in ways that don't mean current
Oh,
Time's up.
Am I done? Okay.
No, I was gonna say.
That don't mean current resident displacement, right? How can we build infrastructure that allows for a way to maintain current demographics? I'm a scholar of universities and urban development, so I know this story very intimately. This is my question. How can we create an equitable infrastructure that allows us to grow economically without displacing current residents and current residential visions? How can we create a vision of sustainability from the perspective of those who are currently here and not just those we want to attract to come here? Because bike paths and farmers markets and farm to table restaurants aren't necessarily in the interest of those who currently live here. Let's be clear. And so how can we build sustainability for everyone? Yeah, go, please. She's jumping. She's jumping. Okay.
Well, this is the thing. Your question assumes that bike paths and farmers markets are not for people who. I mean, that's what was getting me, excited about your question, because you're saying that bike paths and all the things that we try to envision when we envision the sustainability are, quote, not for the people who live here. But I have to say, in the city of Hartford, very few people. Lots of people have access to different forms of public transportation. There's a huge chunk of people that don't have access to a car. So those people are either taking the bus or they're taking their bikes. And bike travel is, for many people in Hartford, the way they get to work, the way they get to school, the way they get to opportunities. So I push back on that and say, the people in the city rich, poor, everybody, there's a spectrum of people who advocate for bike lanes, who support bike lanes. BCCO on Park Street through the Center of Latino Progress is bringing bike education, bike maintenance classes, bike rentals, all of those things to a community. Park Street, primarily Spanish speaking, primarily low income, and they're finding that the demand is huge. So I would push back on that and say bike paths in particular was not maybe the best example, because that's a way that a lot of people in Hartford get around, and we have been pushing for greater bike paths. We've gotten a multi-million-dollar grant from the state to extend the Riverfront Trail northward, so it's a multimodal bike path, through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and also through a new policy adopted by the City Council. And I just saw Councilman Concepcion coming in. I know he's championed this idea as well, to institute a complete streets policy that requires our Department of Public Works to put bike lanes everywhere they can. I mean, on the topic of farmers markets too, farmers markets are for everyone. I just showed that picture of Salvador, who's been trained through the Knox Urban Gardeners program in growing techniques and selling techniques. It's generating an income for him, the farmers markets that are here. Not only that, but many of the farmers markets are here double SNAP benefits. So SNAP benefits are, food benefits for the low income, and that's where they get fresh food. So Hartford as a food desert, the farmers markets are often the best way and sometimes the only way for people to access fresh food. So, maybe the side benefit maybe to some is that, these kinds of resources are attracting the wealthy from outside of town. But you know what? They're really serving the people who live here. And so that's where I would say, the climate action planning, the effort to support, all of that and more, we got to support things like electric vehicle charging stations. We got to support that, better public transportation, because that cleans our air. And if you look at who's affected by bad air, it's people at the crossroads, in low-income neighborhoods, at the crossroads of our interstates, with all the traffic that's coming in from commuters, all of them going out. So if we support the kind of infrastructure that makes people, maybe people who can afford the electric vehicles, but helps them make better choices, it actually improves health for all of us. And so in the climate action plan, the three values are economic development, public health, and social equity. And if you look through that document, again, hartford.gov/climate, everything in that document speaks to two or more of those goals. And I think that you have to have a cleaner environment. You have to have sustainability. And for a city like Hartford, it's not a privilege, it's a right. It is a human right for people in our city to have that. So that's why I was getting all.
I know you wouldn't really let me finish. I know, right? Let me just jump in real quick and say I'm not saying that I'm against these strategies at all. What I'm saying is that I've done national studies that look at the approach that many cities take, and this is very predictable. This is the approach that almost every city takes in terms of their vision of growth. So I'm just asking, alongside these strategies, which I'm not discounting, I'm championing, how can we be courageous and develop a vision of sustainability based on the visions and desires and interests of those who are already here? What are they defining as sustainability? Because what we're talking about now are very much top-down vision sustainability that have been tried all over the country. So I'm not saying you are doing anything, but I would love to hear if you have examples of vision sustainability that takes into account what actual residents are saying they envision. For example, affordable housing, right? Or mixed income housing, or micro loans for commercial development, things of this nature. So, other ways of sustainability, not just counting these, but in addition to. But I want to let other people answer the question as well. That'd be great, and then we can jump in. Yeah.
So, I guess I'm going to take on some of what you're saying in a related set of questions. First of all, the idea of the local is very important, and as a scholar at place myself, I applaud your talk. However, if you were to take the United States and find one state in which the idea of the local had been
Sacralized, beautiful. Portsmouth to some degree. It should be Portland, Oregon to some degree, but yes.
Connecticut would win.
Would what?
Connecticut, the idea of the local in Connecticut is extremely powerful. It works at every level of governance, so that you have whatever 169 or whatever political areas.
And they compete.
And in some ways, the triumph of the local in Connecticut has been the problem, because there's no sense of the regional.
Yeah, but I'm going to argue that politics is almost irrelevant to culture.
There's a complete connection between the way government's structured and how people identify. Because people start to identify with their
Yeah.
in particular ways, so people see their interests as being local. I know that Mayor Brennan has gone around to places outside of Hartford to try to argue for regionalisation strategies, and I think had a hard time with that kind of local identity that people want to insist. Sometimes it becomes a thinly veiled guise for various forms of xenophobia and racism.
NIMBYism.
And so while I believe in the local, and I'm all for farmers markets and local products and local things happening in restaurants and parts of that, I do think that there's a dark side to it.
Well, my little joke about this is whether people in the suburbs like or dislike Hartford, the one thing we know for sure is nobody in any suburb cares about any other suburb. So that there is actually a chance that at least 40 or even 60% of the suburban population, as if we can get that to 70%, actually care about the hub. No spoke cares about another spoke. And the other little joke, I didn't make this up, somebody described Connecticut as the story of 169 angry little towns. And we do have a problem, there's no question, but with the localism and the home rule thing versus a kind of regional mindset, and how you get to cross that river, Jordan, I don't know. But
the second thing I just wanted to say about the displacement gentrification argument, which is essentially what you're talking about, is that when you saw that chart of Providence and its success, you can be sure that the blue line that's going up was not the people that lived there getting richer. It was the people that lived there being displaced, it's people moving in who are richer. And that
Somewhat,
was the difference
yeah.
between that blue line and the red line in Hartford.
Well, we know that the jewelry corridor was converted to the knowledge corridor
Right.
as a part of that kind of upscaling.
And the more, I had the privilege through the Hartford leadership group, several people here probably were in that I was in last week. We went to this, I suppose it's called the Swift Factory, which is an old, I think it's Swift, it's Gold Leaf.
the gold leaf,
Factory,
yeah.
which is an old industrial building that's being redeveloped by a private group. But the redevelopment thing that was described, if it's accurate, was brilliant, because they talked to the community around them. They got someone from the local community to be involved, to be hired by them essentially. And while their normal strategy, the organisation doing it, was to build houses for the homeless, which is a wonderful thing, what they discovered from the community was that's not what was needed there. What was needed was jobs for the people who lived there. And so instead, you're going to have Bear Barbecue and other people providing jobs for the people in the local area. A large number of them ex-convicts, people who can be trained in jobs that are accessible to people with the levels of training who lived in that area. And to me, that was a local example of a development process that was actually, to me, differentiated it from the gentrification processes that often happen around, and displacement that does often happen around successful local development.
Yeah, so Community Solutions is the group you're referring to, and they were pretty active in participating in the climate action planning process. So again, I would say that that process in Hartford is by no means top down. I mean, we had 30 stakeholder organizations, we had forums, we had even in the planning process, and Melvin can sort of testify to this. We met with every group that wanted to meet with us, every NRZ, and got everybody's feedback. And when we passed that zoning code, it was 3 hours of public hearing, and everybody was effusively positive, except for a couple people who came to talk about something totally unrelated to this, which is the concept of the number of people in a household, which is
Right.
not. But other than that, we had 3 hours of people coming in and saying, "This is great. You really listen to us," and so on and so on. So again, I think the planning process in Hartford is not top down. It's and Community Solutions is a great example of that. They've participated in everything that we've done. Actually, one of the neighborhood liaison for Community Solutions, John Thomas, is another planning and zoning commissioner, and he lives in Northeast, and so we're really all about that here in Hartford. And I think that's what's differentiating our modern planning efforts from what may have happened in the past. And so. Oh, thanks, Isaac.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this presentation. It was excellent. Just a couple of just minor note. Tom Dry, your presentation, you're missing St. Joseph's.
Yes.
In Hartford?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And also a comparison of payment of taxes by the state and the city. We have a big problem with that in Hartford. know that. My question is really about economic development and the organizations behind Hartford. When the Amazon HQ2 came up, I did a comparison of Hartford's comparable cities that are competing with. Most other cities are very independent in their economic development, thinking, organization, policy making, and so on. But Hartford is kind of a victim of trickle-down economics. It comes from the state, and it trickles down, and Hartford accepts it, shortage of funding or whatever. And it's a cause of concern, because the type of development we have in Hartford has not, I'm talking about specifically business growth type. And it's, most of it coming from the state, and has not been very beneficial. 2008, there was innovation clusters. Don't know what happened to that. In 2012, 13, we had innovation hubs. That was almost a disaster. They had an auditor's report done on it, courtesy of the comptroller of the state, and that didn't go well. So today we have innovation places, and I think the jury is out on that, because we've already gone through it twice before. So my take on this is really for Hartford to do due diligence on having its own economic thinking, have economic professionals in the development office, and litmus test of that will be for the next time we have an Amazon HQ2 type bid coming in for Hartford, Hartford does it by themselves, or at least most of it. This time, I mean, I think tomorrow, the state's going to send out two cities, Stanford and Hartford's bid for the Amazon HQ bid. So what are your takes on really beefing up, really, putting in more economic thinking and planning in the city?
I mean, the Hartford, what Amazon has said they wanted is a regional approach. So I don't think, Hartford will ever be able to go it alone. And, again, this is a better question probably for Luke, when he comes up and talks. But I think, the regional approach, we have to have the regional approach. We have to all work together. I mean, if it were up to, some people who are advocating for that, we'd completely, we'd bring back counties and we'd eliminate these duplicative local governments. We saw actually local governments starting to consolidate when Governor Malloy, created his emergency executive order, and so they've started to consolidate school services because they don't know where they're getting their money from. So for better or for worse, they're doing it, unfortunately, in a very haphazard way right now, but future thinking about how to do that in a more deliberate way, I think, is inevitable.
I'm sorry, we are short for time. I apologize. We have to keep the ball rolling. But I think that our panelists will definitely be around for maybe a few minutes to answer questions as we transition to the next panel. But please, let's give our panelists another round of applause and thank them for being here. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. Yeah, that was fun.
I'm Garth Myers. I'm a professor here of Urban International Studies. I'm the director of the Urban Studies program here at Trinity College. And I'm delighted to be moderating the second session this morning. It is on regional thinking and local action. And I will introduce our speakers as they come up to speak. Our first speaker is Scott Gall. And Scott is the director of the Community Indicators Project, which is an initiative of the Hartford Foundation to use data to identify and build understanding about issues facing the Metro Hartford region. Gall joined the foundation after serving as director of analysis in the Washington, D.C.-based Microfinance Information Exchange. Prior to that, he worked for the World Bank, Mercy Corps, and Quantitative Risk Management. He holds a master's degree in international affairs from Johns Hopkins and a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Chicago. Please welcome Scott Gall.
Briefly about what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll actually talk about it. So I work at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, which is the community foundation for North Central Connecticut. We focus on 29 towns with Hartford at the center of that. And so we approach issues from sort of a regional lens, and I'm going to use a couple different ways to talk about that during the presentation. We have had a very good, I should say, working relationship with the Center for Urban and Global Studies for the past few years. We've put together a series of reports about sort of the issues that this region faces. Some of them are in the lobby, and if you take them, it will take them out of my office, which I'll be very happy about. but we've worked with the center, and I think it's really a wonderful resource to have for Hartford and the region to help us kind of understand some of the issues, put this with a historical context. And so, we've been very fortunate to work with Dr. Chen and some of the colleagues here. So I'm going to talk about two different things about sort of regional context. I'm going to use a historical example, and then I'm going to talk about some of the data and indicators on the region that, again, talk about how the people frame things and sort of the reasons that I think a lot of people in the past presentation ended up talking about a regional approach as something that's sort of necessary for the region. Let me start with a historical example. Does anybody recognize this or know what this is? I would be very surprised if any of you do. Anyone want to it's a map. You got that. Anyone know what it's a map of? Pennsylvania? False. Western Connecticut. Warmer. So it's a map of here. This is a map of the Hartford region, and it's not obvious for a bunch of different reasons, which I'll explain momentarily. So the first thing they did is they reoriented it. So that in the middle is the Connecticut River, which they renamed the Long River. If I flip it around, it looks a little more familiar, and you can see they did some different things to it. So what's different? First off, it's oriented the other way. That's just kind of a cosmetic change. There's no Hartford. It's called Center City. It's right in the middle there. All the other towns have different names, among other things. So South Farthing, Camelford, Coddington, these are not the towns that are in and around the city of Hartford now. There's a big unincorporated area in what would be Tolland County now. So the other thing they did, they came up with these imaginary names, and they redrew all the borders. So like where it would be kind of Windsor, Bloomfield, and part of Simsbury or Avon, it's the town of Winston. So they redrew all these borders. So where did this map come from, and why does it exist? So there's a little citation at the bottom, and I owe this to Tom Phillips, who used to be the head of the workforce board here, who dug it out of his archives. And another university, the lovely folks at University of Connecticut have now kind of digitized this and put it in their archives. But it's a little bit of lost piece of history that talks about some of the struggles that this region has had about thinking about itself as a unit, and one way that they tried to address it. So the history of where this came from was out of a lawsuit. So in the 1970s, the city of Hartford essentially sued the surrounding suburban towns to put more affordable housing in. So the lawsuit's called Hartford v. Hills. It's in the sort of fold out in the reports out there. So they sue. I'm not a lawyer, but they asked the federal government to not give funding to 7 surrounding communities because those communities had not put in sufficient affordable housing. So they took them to court and said, "Don't give these towns money. They didn't put in enough for affordable housing. You should not give them the resources to do that." So the court, kind of as part of the resolution, they said, you all have some things you need to work out. Hartford and the surrounding communities, you gotta, sit down, get together, and they produced these enormous books called the Long River Region Simulation, which has a much longer title, A Learning Package About Interjurisdictional Policy Management for Elected, Appointed, and Citizen Officials and Classroom Students, like you, or many of you. So everybody in this room falls into one of those categories. But this is, something that they produced, and they had workshops where they would get people together and say, like, all right, reimagine this region from scratch. We're going to give you the same basic geographic features. There's a river in the middle. It's about this wide and about this tall. And figure out, where would you put the sewer systems? Where would you, put all the housing? Where would you put open space? Where would you put the businesses? Where would you put the highways? And they really had to go in and, redraw those lines. I think as one of the questions had, not using their own identity. So they weren't allowed to go in and think of this as like, I work for the town of West Hartford, or I work for the city of Hartford. They had to go in and think, I work for Camelford or Center City or Coddington. They had to really, in the truest way, sort of reimagine that. And again, as I said, this really grew out of a very fractious event where the city and suburbs kind of took each other into court. And this is some of the news coverage from the time, from the Hartford Times, where you can't read it. But if you were going to read it, it says the city of Hartford had a death wish and is going on a very lonely path in the future. So this is kind of a bad time. But they said, let's go in and try and work things out and figure out things. But they had to reimagine how they thought about things in order to do that. This map is, one piece of how they encourage local elected officials, people on boards and commissions, residents, and students to do that. So this is, nobody knows this because this is one, little tiny event in a very long history of kind of the city and the suburbs trying in various ways to work together. And I think as we talked about, not necessarily getting there, but we're closer maybe than we were in the past. So I'll talk about some of the kind of data and indicators for the region. This is the current landscape. This is a map, again, of the same region with the, essentially the boundaries that you know and love in it. This is a composite measure of opportunity. Again, this is in one of the reports that's out in the lobby. So this tries to boil a lot of different things together about quality of life, access to jobs, performance of the school system. It's not perfect, but this gives you a sense of kind of the current landscape. So if you sort of read the, this map of the region, you see that the city of Hartford has really the most concentration of challenges, the lowest sort of like access to opportunity in the region, but it's not alone at this point. So if you look at the shading, you see the same shading that Hartford has, covers a lot of ground in East Hartford, a lot of ground in New Britain, which is not very far away. And there's little pockets in Manchester, Vernon, a lot of the old inner ring suburban towns around Hartford. They're facing a lot of the same issues and challenges that Hartford is today in smaller geographic areas. But what Hartford has as its challenges are not alone. And then again, if you look at the coloring, a very large part of the geographic area in this map are very high opportunity areas. And that's where one of the central tensions for this region is that they're all linked together. So they're all in close geographic proximity. They all have a sort of shared fate in a lot of ways, but there's very different sort of conditions on the ground in those places. So I'll talk about, this is another piece of sort of data. This is how did we get here? So that was the current landscape here. This is the sort of the region as it stands today. One metric, and this is kind of the long span of time from 1800 to the present, and per the sort of the tagline for the day, looking out a little bit into the future, and this touches on the slides that Tom had presented earlier. So this is, if you look at the line in the middle, that's the population for the city of Hartford, which peaked around 1950 at about 180,000 people and has dropped down to about 125,000 now. And UConn, through their state data center, has done projections now out to 2040, and it's projected to be basically the same. So that sort of bifurcation between Providence and Hartford, I don't know what is projected for Providence, but Hartford is projected to be about the same size city for the next 25 years or so. That could change, it's just a projection, but that's what we currently have. In the meantime, what has also happened is very rapid growth in the population in the suburban communities in this region in different waves. So prior to 1950, there's incredibly rapid growth, this big, I'm partially colorblind, green line in the middle that goes right up between 1900 and 1950. That's the inner ring suburban towns. So this is like West Hartford, East Hartford, Manchester, those kinds of places. They really rocketed up and had a very large population increase up to about 1950. And that's really plateaued and is not projected to grow very much. And so once that sort of peaked after 1950 or so, a lot of the population shifted out to the outer ring suburbs. These are places like Simsbury, Ellington, Tolland that are a little further out, sort of lower population density, higher income places. So that has been the sort of general population trends for this region over the last 240 years or so. And so that's part of the context of where we are today. So why does this matter? Part of it is that there's really a balance of power question for decision making. So when the city of Hartford makes decisions, it's making decisions on its own, just as the town of West Hartford and the town of Avon make decisions on their own. But when the state of Connecticut makes decisions, it's making decisions based on people elected from all of these places. And it has shifted from being people who are elected, primarily from the city of Hartford and then less so from the suburbs, to being one where the balance of elected officials and the balance of voters are really predominantly suburban. And so things that are about having cooperation among different municipalities, the balance of power in terms of elected officials for the state is really through the suburban communities now. One other effect of this population shift kind of out, and I think Professor Baldwin had talked about this, is Hartford is really a place where there are a lot of jobs, so it's a center for jobs. But as people have moved further and further out, that has kind of stretched the commuting into and out of the city. So the city has lost population, people have moved out, and then a lot of people get in. There's not really a robust transportation system for the region. So like most of you, I drove here probably alone in a car, which is, I could have carpooled with Bark, but I didn't. But that's the sort of norm for a lot of people in their day-to-day work. That's kind of, something that's normal for cities. Cities are where the jobs are. People, all over the country, they live outside the city and they drive in, they dump their car somewhere during the day, and then they go back out at night. That's normal. What's different about Hartford, I'll talk about some of the employment stats, comparing it to some of the other cities in Connecticut, and this goes to a little bit indirectly some of the other events that we're having to talk about the financial situation of the city today. So all cities have a lot of jobs in them. That's what makes them cities. But Hartford has more than other cities of similar size and constitution. So if you look at employment in the city limits for the sort of major cities in Connecticut, Hartford has about 107,000 people that work in the city of Hartford. A little over 90,000 of them commute in from outside the city, which is a lot. Bridgeport, where it's different, Bridgeport has about 40,000 people that work in the city. New Haven has closer to 80,000. Waterbury, which is a similar sized town, has about 40,000 too. So when you think like that means Hartford is a very different city during sort of 9 to 5 daytime working hours than it is in the evening. So Hartford during the day is close to 200,000 population. Bridgeport shrinks during the day. Bridgeport is a smaller city during the day because more people leave Bridgeport for work than come into Bridgeport for work. So while Hartford and Bridgeport are often talked about in similar ways, they're both kind of cities with challenges in the state of Connecticut. Hartford is very different in that respect in that it almost doubles the population during the day, which that ties into some of the things that are part of the financial condition for the city. There was a good study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston about property taxes, and they looked at, well, what are the things that really drive the cost of running a city? What are the sources of revenue? And two of the things that they pointed at for that were the volume of jobs that are inside the city limits and really the reliance on public services. So that the cities that have more jobs, it costs more to run that city. If I've used this example other places, I think, but if I walked out of here and I had, a medical incident or something, like the first responders would come, they don't check my residency card, whether I live in the city of Hartford, they help out, all roughly 200,000 people that are in the city limits during the day the same way. So that makes Hartford more expensive to run than other cities. And that's, that's different, that's similar to most cities, but it's different than other cities in Connecticut. I'll talk about, again, rolling back the clock. You want to know how people get into and out of the city. This is how people did it 100 years ago. This is the trolley network, which is very dense. And if you dig up the maps, there's like 3 stops in Glastonbury, 3 stops in Manchester. So there's a very dense trolley network. There's a very dense rail network 118 years ago. We don't have it anymore. But some of these pieces are coming back. So this is, again, a little more detail in the reports that are out there, but they are building some of the transportation network to help ease some of those things. And that has indirect implications for some of the things that were at the root of the lawsuit that we talked about at the beginning. So some of that the transportation network permits development around the transportation network. Some of that development is going to be housing, which is something that addresses sort of that central tension. There's a very nice quote here from Jennifer Rodriguez, who's the town planner for Windsor Locks, where again they're literally rolling back the clock and taking a train station that was built sort of post-war, that's next to the highway in a floodplain or something in Windsor Locks and completely unlovable, and trying to move it back to the building that was the train station 100 years ago in downtown Windsor Locks to make it a place that people want to walk around, go to their apartment, get a cup of coffee. The same way I think that we talked about the vision for Hartford earlier. And to plug kind of the same project that Professor Broner had mentioned, for people that want to get engaged or involved in some of these things, and this is I think the tension that Professor Baldwin talked about, if you want to get involved in some of these things, there are ways to do that. So I think people are trying to make it so that the way in which things have been approached in other parts of the country does not happen here. There's a very nice initiative through Center for Latino Progress that the Hartford Foundation is a supporter of, called Transport Hartford. And if you want to say, like, I want to understand how these things are happening, I want to understand what are they going to do with this big highway? Is it going to go through my backyard? I didn't know they were redoing the bus lines. If you want to understand those things, that's a good place to get engaged and try and become sort of a resident advocate for it. So I'll plug that sort of at the end of this. But there's a lot of things happening, but there's a very long-standing, centuries-long tension between cities and suburbs. And so we're chipping away at it in little ways. So. On to Julio. Thanks.
Our second speaker is Julio Concepcion. He's Vice President of Hartford Partnerships for the Metro Hartford Alliance, the Hartford Region's Chamber of Commerce. In his role, Julio serves as the business community's liaison to Hartford's elected and appointed officials, the city department heads, and its neighborhoods. Julio also serves as the majority leader for Hartford City Council.
Let's see if I can figure this out. I am a millennial. Great. Right when I go up, right? Yeah, right on time.
Oh, now it is.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Just a special thanks to Dr. Chen and the Trinity staff for inviting me and the Alliance to take part in this important symposium. So over the next 10 minutes or so, what I'll do is I'll try to give a general sense of what the business community's climate is here in Hartford and the Hartford region. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges that our investors face, both large and small businesses throughout. And more importantly, we'll talk about some of the initiatives that we've started at the Alliance, working with a lot of our partners in the city and the state to try to mitigate some of the issues that the business community faces, again, here in the city and region. And at the end, I'll close by talking about some things that are happening here in the city that has the business community very excited and still bullish about the future of Hartford. So first, we'll start off with the bad stuff, the challenges that a lot of our investors. Let's see if I'm doing this right. Yep. That our investors face throughout the region. And just to be clear, these are just some of the challenges that they face. There are certainly some more challenges, but these are the most prevalent ones, the ones that we hear the most from our investors. The first, I think, is really the most top of mind, just because we've been hearing about it for the last 6 months or so, which is obviously the uncertainty of the city of Hartford and Connecticut's fiscal issues. I believe I've done the math correctly, and we are at day 111 without a state budget. Obviously, being the only state in the country without a state budget is problematic. It affects the business community's morale. So we're, again, trying to work on seeing what we can do to mitigate some of those issues. Obviously, the administration in the city, and I've put Hartford facing a potential bankruptcy filing, the administration in the city has been very, very clear that without strong state support or some kind of new partnership with the state, the city might not be able to meet its obligations and might have to file for bankruptcy. I think we're all hoping to avoid that, but it's certainly, again, as Scott mentioned, the city is the hub of the business community here in the state, so it's something that is of great concern to a lot of our members. The second challenge that we hear a lot is the state's refusal or inability to adapt to a changing landscape. And I just put two quick examples. For far too long, I think the state has neglected investment in urban areas and lack of focus on transportation infrastructure. There are plenty of examples throughout the country of cities that have invested in their urban areas and have invested in transportation issues. Raleigh, the Raleighs, the Richmonds, the Austins, you can name a bunch. And I think the state of Connecticut is behind the curve on a lot of those issues. So the business community, again, it's something that they've been trying to push to get the city and the region up to par with a lot of our neighboring states and comparable cities. So that's of great concern. The third should come to no really shock. It's the cost of doing business here in the city and the region. I think it's expensive to do business here in Connecticut, whether it's energy costs or just cost of living. The cost is of concern to all businesses when they're either trying to open up a business or just sustain their business or hopefully even trying to grow their business. The cost is something big. The property taxes, particularly in our urban areas, particularly in the city of Hartford, that we have a mill rate of 74.29, which is almost double that of a lot of our surrounding neighborhoods or surrounding towns, abutting towns. That is of great concern, obviously, to a lot of our larger employers, but more specifically to our smaller businesses throughout the city. They are the ones that are really, really struggling to make ends meet, the small businesses throughout our corridors that are really the lifeblood of the city. That 74.29 is an issue. It's a challenge for them. But without question, the biggest challenge that we hear from our investors is their inability to attract and more importantly retain a young workforce. There have been two specific examples of this over the last 2 years. The first being GE's decision to move their headquarters from Stanford down to Boston. And there's a nice little quote from Jeff Imlett, who discusses both an ecosystem and discusses university systems. So again, I think keeping the young professionals and trying to attract young professionals is something that we've been struggling with a little bit, and is, again, a concern to the business community. And while GE's not in the Hartford region, it's still, their decision to leave the state caused some ripple effects and scared a lot of the business community here in the city. So, and of course, the second one is the one that affects us here in the region the most, was Aetna's decision to leave the city of Hartford to New York. And CEO Mark Bertolini just came out and said it. We're looking for young people. The healthcare industry is changing, and we want that young kind of blood to really change, to come change with us. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to business retention, business growth here in the city, but we've been doing a couple of things. I want to focus on a couple initiatives that we're trying to combat some of these issues to, again, increase retention and recruitment of both workforce and businesses. The first is our nationally recognized program called HYPE. Some of you may have heard of HYPE. HYPE, which was created back in 2006, so it's about 11 years old now. Their mission is to help young professionals become better engaged in community life, expand professional and social opportunities, and become ambassadors for the Hartford region. We find out very quickly that the more you get young people involved in their community, the harder it is for them to leave. So HYPE, which has started with a handful of individuals, probably 10, 15, 20 young professionals meeting, now has, in about a decade, has over 4,000 members, professionals of all careers, teachers, police officers, lawyers, everything you can imagine, and has, again, trying to get them involved. They host about 70 events a year. Some of them are community-based. Some of them are just professionally based. Some of them are professional development stuff that they do. But again, the biggest one, the biggest driver is really the community base, trying to get them involved in the Hartford and the Hartford region community. So it's a great resource. I've put a couple stats there so everyone sees just, over the last 7 years, they've raised over $111,000 for nonprofits in the city. They've collected over 11,000 toys for the boys and girls clubs of the city, and collected about 7,000 items for various nonprofits in the city. Again, it's a great tool for our business community when it comes to retention and attraction for young professionals. Another initiative that we've created, because we have to market this region. We have to market living in the city of Hartford. So something we created a few years ago is our Live Hartford campaign, focusing on just marketing living in the city of Hartford. This is an amazing place to live. There's a lot of opportunities. Some of our neighborhoods most of our neighborhoods are incredible. So the Live Hartford campaign really has two components to it. The first one is the livehartford.org website, which serves as kind of a one-stop shop for anything Hartford living. If you're interested in living in the city of Hartford, this website, which we are redoing soups to nuts, should be back up by the end of the year, serves, you can go there, find home ownership opportunities, information on rental opportunities, but more importantly, information on neighborhoods, information on schools, information on things, everything you need to know when deciding to move into a city. It's a great tool for our business community to use to attract some of their workforce when they're getting people from all over the country, where they can just send them to one website and they can find all the information they want. The second component to Live Hartford is something that we've worked on with Sina and a lot of our memberships, or a lot of our community groups. It's called the Hartford Home Ownership Incentive Program. This is a program that was created about 4 years ago to help our larger employers incentivize their own employees to purchase a home in the city. Because again, if you're vested in the community you live in, it's going to be harder for you to leave. So we've gotten 6 or 7 of our larger employers who have committed to $10,000 forgivable grants to their own employees if they choose to purchase a home in the city. Again, just another tool that we can use to try to attract and retain our workforce. Along with that, we of course are trying to really galvanize small business growth. It's been difficult, again, with the challenges that I mentioned earlier, to have some business growth. So what we created 2 years ago was a program called Innovation Destination Hartford. This, as you can read, the mission statement, it's essentially the website serves as kind of a portal for information for anybody that is interested in either starting a business or growing their business. We found that there was a void that people just didn't know where to go. If they have great ideas, they just didn't know where to go. So this website that has over 400 resources, everything from city resources to private, public, state resources, has been an extraordinary tool to, again, attract and try to grow some of our small businesses. And I encourage anybody that's interested in it to check out the website. I've added it before. And just lastly, along with these initiatives, there's several reasons, as I mentioned earlier, even with the challenges that the state or the business community is extremely bullish about the future of the city. And I just jotted down a few issues. A few of them. I mean, the revitalization of downtown, the work that CRDA has done over the last 5 years on opening up thousands of units of housing. Our hotels are coming back. The Goodwin has opened up. Our entertainment district is thriving with the creation of the ballpark down in downtown North. Transportation enhancements, we're again behind the curve, but at least we're moving forward with it. CT Fast Track has been a real gem. The Hartford line, the high-speed rails coming next year, which again could revitalize this area. Promise Zone designation up in the North End is extremely important, and we have to make sure that we continue to work on that. Some neighborhood attractions. I just put Frog Hollow, Parkville, Upper Albany. If you haven't been to those particular neighborhoods in a while, I encourage you to do so. There's some fantastic things happening. You go in there and there's a lot of energy, and it's palpable to the business community, and they're excited about it. Park infrastructure with the 2 award-winning golf courses, the Colt National Park coming, Northeast. I put Northeast College down. UConn moving to downtown. The effects that Trinity here in their campus and ultimately in downtown, University of Hartford, Capital. All of this is what we need to leverage to make the city a great place, and the business community really sees that as an asset. And discussion of regional efforts, as Scott mentioned, I just put a quick quote that I always use: "You never let a good crisis go to waste." And while we have a financial crisis right now that is in front of us, the good thing about it is that we are talking about it. And there have been some discussions on regional approaches. Where that lands, we'll see. But at least that conversation is ongoing. And finally, I'll just finish with the future development things that I think are exciting. Downtown North, next to the ballpark, needs to be developed. Park and Main, and a few other, the I-84 project that is going to be transformative here in the city. These are the things that keep the business community excited about the city of Hartford, and again, I just encourage you all to take part in this, because we're in this for the long run. So,
Our third speaker is Professor Fiona Bernal. Fiona earned her BA from Princeton University and PhD from Yale. She is Associate Professor of History and Africana Studies at the University of Connecticut. Her current research project uses oral history to chronicle local West Indian immigration and labor history, to tell the story of how West Indians became the largest foreign-born immigrant population in Connecticut. And I'll point out at the back of the room there's also a piece of an exhibition of Fiona's work, particularly to the north end of Hartford, and she may speak a little bit more knowledgeably to that than I can. But definitely take the time during your visit here to have a look at that slice of the exhibition. Thank you.
So in 2010, according to the 2010 census, West Indians surpassed all other ethnic groups in the state of Connecticut to become the largest population of foreign-born immigrants in Connecticut. I had been working in this field for a while, and so I realized that the work that I had been doing could help to explain how we got here to the 2010 census. So the original kernel of this population moved into the Hartford region in the 1940s as guest workers through bilateral labor agreements between British West Indian colonies and the United States. These war manpower related shortages ushered in new immigration opportunities for men to work in the agricultural industry. Great. All right. For men to work primarily in the agricultural industry. They did work such as cutting sugar cane in Florida, picking apples in Midwestern states. In our state, in Connecticut, the shade tobacco sector absorbed thousands of men who planted, netted, and harvested tobacco in subsequent decades. The good work that they put in during the war effort led the Shade Tobacco Growers Association to put in a special request to bring these workers back. Some of these guest workers married local African American women. Some of them were also able to bring their wives a little bit later on. And when they faced discrimination, they founded their own social and religious organizations that acted as autonomous cultural spaces and networks for them. In the 1960s and 1970s, expanded immigration policies prompted new waves of immigrants. This time women and children were able to join this burgeoning community, so that by the 2010 census, the population had grown to more than 70,000, depending on how many other parts of the population you count, and had developed a significant cultural presence in Hartford County. Now, my research takes the form primarily of oral histories that are aimed at giving the members of the community an opportunity to participate in their own storytelling and in their own history and in preserving their own culture. In the 1990s, late 1990s, I was invited by the Connecticut Historical Society to conduct oral histories and to serve as a community liaison in Hartford. They wanted to do an exhibit on the local community, including the local Puerto Rican community. There was a second related project. And they realized that they did not have the kind of artifacts and other archival materials within their own local collection to tell the story, and that they would really have to rely on the community and rely on oral histories. At the time, they did not realize how extensive and expansive the local archive was. We discovered how wrong we were once we got into the community. I was from New Haven, so hiring a New Haven resident who never had driven through Hartford to be the community liaison in Hartford for a person who also didn't have a driver's license and didn't know how to drive. I didn't mention that in the interview at the time. Turned out to be very challenging, but I quickly learned how to drive, got my driver's license, and started driving all over Hartford, all over the North End, and getting to know the community. One of the things that happened is that despite having access to a regular studio, a lot of people wanted to stay in their homes to do their interviews, which I hadn't counted on. And so I had to go to the homes. I drank a lot of tea, spent 5 hours when the interview was only II, and really took on the mantle of community liaison and really fell in love with the community and actually moved here from New Haven. So today I'd like to share with you a little bit of what I learned from the forays into the local community archives and into the possibilities of what we've been talking about here, especially in the earlier panel, about what a place-based education pedagogy looks like and what sort of materials can help us to accomplish that kind of place-based education. So what can the oral histories and archives tell us about identity and placemaking here? So from the oral histories you learn that economic woes in the Caribbean in the 1930s drove a lot of men to look for other opportunities. But you also learn, as you go through these oral histories, that there is a huge tradition of what scholars call circum-Caribbean migration, meaning internal, local migration from one island to the other. So that West Indian men are quite accustomed to working in Cuba. They're quite accustomed to working in Costa Rica. They built the Panama Canal Zone. And so they have had this reputation and this experience of being, they've had this reputation of being very good workers, and they have this very much longer history of moving around the Caribbean. So that coming to the United States was, in the 1940s, was just a larger part, was just a part of that larger tradition of local migration. We also learned that no matter what the actual job title of these men, that they responded with all sorts of creativity and imagination to the to opportunities to come here. So men who were tailors and clerks and bookkeepers and accountants and who probably didn't know what farming tools were, much less held one, decided that they were going to come to the US for farm work, and that they had to pretend, or at least be able to show during their physical exams, that they had some experience. And so men who were too skinny, they gorged themselves on ripe bananas and sugary drinks to meet the weight requirements. They took actual stones and rubbed their hands so that their hands would be rough and callous to make it seem as if they were experienced farm workers. They also interestingly borrowed dentures if they couldn't meet the dental requirements. And probably most of these are hilarious, right? Hilarious examples, but sort of, they also recount the injustice of having to parade around naked in front of a group of people while they're being prodded and poked, and people are looking in their mouths and like sort of checking orifices and making sure that everything is all right for farm work. Now, once in the United States, the oral histories, the men recount in these oral histories that they were able, compared to the local African-American community and also African-American community that was also migrating from the South here, that they were able to benefit from very positive labor stereotypes associated with black men, the vast majority of them Jamaicans, and that this created a lot of tension for them. So the fact that the shade tobacco growers were able to team up with other associations from Massachusetts and also growers, apple pickers from Midwestern states, and sugarcane farmers in the South that would sort of create a cabal that could go to Washington, D.C. and lobby for these laborers and make the argument that they didn't actually have enough local workers who could do this kind of work. They recounted the kind of tensions that comes from having a positive labor stereotype being created around really menial, low-paying jobs that they actually welcomed. Because of the exchange rate, they were able to afford a middle-class life back in the Caribbean, and yet at the same time they continue to drive the prices down for local labor, again creating a lot of tension with the local African-American community that's pushing for better jobs, well-paid jobs, not menial jobs. The women who began coming in greater numbers in the 1960s and in the 1970s recounted similar experiences of how to navigate a labor stereotype that works in their favor. And so West Indian women were able to secure jobs as nannies, as nannies, as housekeepers, as nurses' aides. Again, that traffic in the stereotype of black women as caregivers, and yet sort of pigeonhole them in those kinds of positions in particular, with a lot of their employers expressing a little bit of surprise when those women don't want to spend 30 years being a nurse's aide or being a nanny or being a housekeeper. On the other hand, a lot of these men and a lot of these women also recounted how the social networks that they were able to create because they were employed in these industries made it much easier for them to navigate sort of the larger social landscape in which they were being discriminated against. So that you have women who were nannies in a lot of Jewish households. A lot of Jewish households like to use West Indian nannies, would then pay for the education of the children of their nannies. Or farmers who were part of the Shade Tobacco Association helping the children of the men who were in their employ. And then forging really close personal relationships where they're going to Jamaica to participate in weddings and in christenings, and having this like very long, sort of very long personal relationships with these men long after they leave the agricultural industry. In other areas, they faced discrimination, and so there are lots of stories about how trying to integrate themselves into the African American community while also maintaining their distinction, their distinct identity. West Indians created problems because when they walked into a restaurant or when they walked into a bar, it didn't matter if they were Jamaicans or Trinidadians, it just mattered that they were black. And so there's stories about a bar on Windsor Street, for example, where a Jamaican man walked in and the bartender served him and then broke the glass, and then served him again. He ordered another drink and he broke the glass again. And so the next time he came, he said he was going to bring a lot of his black friends to see if the guy was willing to destroy every single glass in his bar. And although he recounted that story triumphantly, it was these kinds of experiences that drove them to want to create their own autonomous social spaces so that they didn't have to confront racism on a day-to-day basis in their lives. And so these experiences drove the men, primarily men, with all men at the time, 1950s, to create the West Indian Social Club, which is the first West Indian Social Club in Hartford. This is a picture from Barber Street. It was a two-family, multi-family house that they purchased and renovated and created a little dance floor and of course a bar. Have to have a bar. And a bar. And they used this space to host their events. So this is specifically a picture from the 9th anniversary of West Indian Week, which would make that 1971.
It's about 1 minute left.
Sorry?
About 1 minute left.
About 1 minute left. All right. So in addition to this social club, which has been raised, and now there's a housing development there, and a much larger West Indian social club over at the top of Main Street. The oral histories also talk about the kind of visions that these men and women had for their children's education, the kind of home ownership opportunities they imagined for themselves, and so there is a significant proportion of the West Indian population own their homes, and the kind of businesses and homes and educational dreams that they have. And just by way of conclusion, I think that this kind of work, where the community has an opportunity to participate in telling their own stories and can show well-established museums that they do have their own archives and that they do have their own artifacts. They may be dispersed, they may be disparate, but they can tell their own stories. So I think this offers insight into Hartford's immigrant past and the way forward as we welcome, or as we try to welcome, immigrant populations, And as the demographic population of Hartford shifts, right? So in 2010, Jamaicans became the largest population. The South Asian population is probably going to surpass the Jamaican population fairly soon. What does that mean for the makeup of Hartford? What does that mean for the cultural competency and the intercultural communication skills of the vast majority of teachers who are teaching these West Indian and these South Asian children? The other thing that's very important is that as much as everybody lauds reggae music, right, and loves jerk chicken, that there are other narratives about West Indians and the West Indian community that doesn't have anything to do with food and music, that are just as important and can sort of help us think through the way other communities in Hartford, other immigrant communities in Hartford, have addressed issues of entrepreneurship and education and suburbanization. And then finally, just 30 seconds. With really generous funding, also from Trinity, we have now been able to create an ongoing public history project that will yield hundreds of oral histories that will try and engage various schools in Hartford, in the Hartford area, around creating a curriculum that is culturally competent and that speaks to the history and the heritage of the children who are in Hartford Public Schools. We're going to premiere that exhibit, portion of that exhibit here at Trinity on November 15th. And so I brought a sample for you, so when you guys are having your lunch, you can take a quick look at it there. Thank you.